Welcome to another in our series of Kehillat Israel podcasts. This is a recording of Rabbi Amy Bernstein's weekly Friday morning Torah study.
I've been talking to you for the last several weeks about the lecture series by Micha Goodman and his commentary on Deuteronomy, and kind of what he focused on 8 different topics in the lectures, and one of those lined up with our reading last week of chapter 8. And this week, one of his lectures lines up with the Torah portion from this week, I'm very happy to say, which is chapter 12 of the book of Deuteronomy. So if you have a Tanakh in front of you, and or if you want to open a tab on your computer for Sefaria, sefaria.org, and you can follow along any of the texts there. So this is not starting at the very beginning of the Parsha, but we're in the first triennial reading, so this is part of the first third of this Parsha. So these are the laws and the rules that you must carefully observe in the land that Adonai, God of your fathers, is giving you to possess as long as you live on earth. You get to possess it for as long as you live on earth if, right? Remember, we had that whole conversation last week. You abeid ta'abdun, like y'all will way destroy all of the sites at which the nations you are to dispossess worship their gods, whether on lofty mountains and on hills or under any luxuriant tree. So what do we know about where idol worship would happen, where people would build a shrine, is on mountaintops. That makes sense to us, right? And hills are another place that people would do that. Also trees, in a certain sense, could be a symbol of the goddess Asherah. And sometimes they would put up a wooden post that was to be the symbol of a tree, which was the symbol of Asherah and her presence at the altar. So trees make sense on some level. And what are you to do with their mizbeach, with their altar? You are to tear it down. And you are to smash, vishibartem, you will smash matzevotam, their matzevot, their standing pillars, which was also a symbol of the presence of the deity in these small sacrificial cult sites. Put their sacred posts to the fire. So these are the wooden posts that are to be the symbol of the goddess Asherah, and cut down the images of their gods, obliterating their name from that site. All right, this is what you're supposed to do when you get to the land, Israelites. Did they do that? No. So this is the reality that the Deuteronomist is dealing with, is that they did not do that. And there's lots of worship of Baal and Asherah and all this other stuff going on in the land. So the Deuteronomist puts it back in the mouth of Moshe. Do not worship, lo ta'asun kain la'Adonai Elohechem. You will not worship Yud He Vav He like that. How? Ki im elamakom asher yivchar Adonai Elohechem. So how are you going to worship Yud He Vav He that's different? This is new for Deuteronomy. Remember, this is a reform. This is a religious reform. So what is the new? What is the reform? You will worship Yud He Vav He only at the site where God will choose amidst all your tribe, right? Lashum et shmo, to place God's name, sham, there. L'shichno, where God will choose to establish, right, God's name. There you are to go. And there you are to bring your burnt offerings and other sacrifices, your tithes and contributions, your votive and free will offerings, and the firstlings of your herds and flocks. Remember, they belong to God. The firstborn belongs to God. Together with your households, you shall feast there before Yud He Vav He your God, happy in all the undertakings in which Yud He Vav He your God has blessed you. You shall not act at all as we now act here, meaning in the desert, every person as he pleases, because you have not yet come to the allotted haven that Yud He Vav He your God is giving you. So you're not going to do in the land because we haven't gotten to the land yet. We're still in the desert. You're not going to do when you get to the land what you do here. Okay. Doing whatever you want. You have to follow a central set of rules. When you cross the Jordan and settle in the land that Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, your God, is allotting to you, and God grants you safety from all your enemies around you, and you live in security, then you must bring everything that I command you to the site where Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, your God, will choose to establish God's name, your burnt offerings and other sacrifices, your tithes and contributions. You hear the language over and over and over. And all the choice votive offerings that you vow to Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. And you shall rejoice before Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, your God, with your sons and daughters, with your male and female slaves, along with the Levite in your settlements. Remember to take care of the Levite, because what are we doing? We are taking away their job. By centralizing worship in Jerusalem, you have just put out of work all of the local Levites who would have served at the shrines all around Israel, and now they are out of work. They're not going to get those portions of those sacrifices, because now all the sacrifice is going to happen at the Jerusalem temple, and the only place they're going to be able to eat or get a good serving of steak is when it's their turn to serve in the Jerusalem temple. So Deuteronomy is coming to say, don't forget to take care of the Levite who has no other portion, who's not going to have produce, who's not going to have fields. They only have what they get from y'all. Take care not to sacrifice your burnt offerings in any place that you like, but only in the place where Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh will choose in one of your tribal territories. We, of course, know where that is. There you shall sacrifice your burnt offerings, and there you shall observe all that I enjoined upon you. But here's the big change of Deuteronomy. Whenever you desire, you may slaughter and eat meat in any of your settlements, according to the blessing that Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, your God, has granted you. The unclean and the clean alike, meaning people, may partake of it as of the gazelle and the deer. This is new. Now you can eat meat wherever you want, and it does not have to be sacrificial meat. But you must not partake of the blood. You shall pour it out on the ground like water. You may not partake in your settlements of the tithes of your new grain or wine or oil or the firstings of your herds and flocks, right? Those will have to be consumed where, says verse 18, before Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, your God, in the place that God will choose, meaning the temple in Jerusalem. And here we go again at 19. Be sure not to neglect the Levite as long as you live in your land, because now the Levites are going to be, according to Deuteronomy, right, dependent on gifts and those kinds of things because they have no land. When Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh enlarges your territory, as God has promised you, and you say, I shall eat some meat, for you have the urge to eat meat, you may eat meat wherever you wish. This is a big change. And we're going to talk a little bit about what Micha Goodman sees as the move here. If the place where Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh is chosen to establish God's name is too far from you, you may slaughter any of the cattle or sheep that Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh gives you, as I have instructed you, and you may eat to your heart's content in your settlements. Eat it, however, as the gazelle and the deer are eaten. The unclean may eat together with the clean, because it's not a sacrifice. Only people who are in a state of ritual purity could eat the sacrifices, remember? But make sure that you do not partake of the blood, for the blood is the life, and you must not consume the life with the flesh. You must not partake of it. You must pour it on the ground like water. You must not partake of it in order that all will go well with you and your descendants for doing what's right in the sight of God. But such sacred and votive donations as you may have shall be taken by you to the site that Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh will choose. You shall offer your burnt offerings, both the flesh and the blood. Okay, pay attention here. Micha wants us to pay attention to this. You shall offer your burnt offerings. V'asita olatecha, right? You will make your burnt offerings. Habasar v'hadam al hamizbeach, the flesh and the blood on the altar of Adonai your God, and of your other sacrifices, The blood shall be poured out on the altar of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, your God, but you will eat the flesh. All right. And then it goes on to say, be careful, 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 be careful. You're not going to do what they do. Don't do what they do. Don't do what they do. Be careful, be careful, be careful, be careful. Okay. All right. So let's talk a little bit about this move. So what's just happened? We're getting, in these chapters, we are getting a recapitulation of the relationship between the people and God's house. Before now, there could be a mizbeach, there could be an altar, and your local Levites that you would go to anytime you had the need for a sacrifice, because you sinned and you just found out, because you were pure and you were impure and didn't know it and did something you're only supposed to do if you're pure, because you want to give an offering of gratitude because something good has happened to you. Whatever the reason is that you are going to bring a sacrifice, you did that locally. And the only meat that people ate was sacrificial meat. Remember, they can't drive up to Wendy's and get a hamburger. They can't go to Chick-fil-A to eat chicken, right? They had to kill the animal and eat it. There were no freezers. There was no way other than salting it. There was no way to preserve meat. So you had to eat that whole animal. That's a lot of meat. That's a lot of food. So it makes some sense that it would only be meat that was sacrificed, because if you're going to do something as extravagant as kill an animal like a sheep or a goat or a cow, it's a big deal, right? The whole clan, the whole village is going to eat, and is going to eat well, right? Think about how much meat is on an entire animal. That's a lot of meat. And they didn't eat a lot of meat. So it's not like us. I can eat a whole steak, no problem. Whole big ribeye, baked potato, the whole thing, no problem. But back then they didn't eat that much meat, right? They weren't that meat dependent. So when they had it, it was a special thing. And you can imagine they didn't digest it. Like, if you don't eat it a lot, right? So this was a very big deal that you had meat that was being eaten and consumed. So what is this move to say you can now eat meat wherever you are and you don't have to sacrifice it? The only place sacrifice is allowed is in the place where God will cause God's name to dwell. You might think, says Micha Goodman, you might think this means that the temple is much more important. The temple's becoming much more important because it becomes the focus. It becomes the only place you can sacrifice and the only place you can bring your tithes and eat them. It's the only place you can bring certain things that they were supposed to bring and eat it. You have to eat it before Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh in Jerusalem. But now, so what you might think that this centralization of sacrifice is really lifting up sacrifice and the temple as something super special. Let's look back at verse 27. You shall offer your burnt offerings, both the flesh and the blood, on the altar. So habasar vehadam, the meat and the blood will be offered on the mizbeach, right? For the olah, for the Holocaust. For all other sacrifices, the blood shall be poured on the altar for God, and you eat the flesh. What's missing? Let's see how much they've been paying attention to Torah study all these years. What's missing? We have blood. We have meat. Jody? You have to unmute.
Skin and bones.
So
Bones.
Skin and bones are part of the meat.
No
Right.
grain offerings.
Mizbeach means altar, Mehmet. Zevach. Zevach is an offering. Mizbeach is where you make the zevach. That mem makes it the place that. Mizbeach, you are offering a zevach on the mizbeach, the thing that allows you to do a zevach. Lisa, what did you say in answer to the question?
I said the entrails.
So what do we usually see? The suet and the fat. Right, you're to burn the entrails on the altar. We also see the suet and the fat. Who gets the fat? Do we remember?
God.
God gets the fat.
Because it smells good.
Because it smells good. That is the offering. That's God's portion. You get the meat. You can't eat the blood, right? So the blood is dashed. The blood is placed on the altar. Where's the fat? Where's
It's burned up.
the portion of the sacrifice? Where'd that go?
It has to be boiled in a,
Napitome. It's roasted.
No, it burns up. It incinerates.
It's not here. It's not here. It's gone. Micha Goodman says, do you think the Deuteronomist forgot? Do you think the Deuteronomist doesn't know? Look how few details we get. Your sacrifices, your offerings, your sacrifices, your tithes, your sacrifices. Now remember Leviticus, right? Remember how detailed, remember how focused Leviticus is on offering the sacrifices exactly the right way. Yeah? Very clear about what's supposed to happen. The procedure, yes, it's the priestly manual for sure. That's its job. That's its role. Deuteronomy's not trying to do that. But look how general the descriptions are here. Your sacrifices. You're not the olah, the shlamim, the chatat, right? No language here about the many different kinds of sacrifice, why you'd sacrifice, what makes a sacrifice, and a big detail, oh yeah, God's portion is left out completely. Richard, do you want to say something?
I was just going to ask if entrails would include, by extension, the internal organs.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Because remember, they wanted to burn it on the altar because they shouldn't be using it for what? Divination. They shouldn't be looking at the heart or the kidney or the liver, whatever in the ancient world they used to look at in order to do divination with an animal. The way you make sure that's not happening is the commandment is that it's burned on the altar. Mehmet saying in Turkish, Mizbeach means slaughterhouse. Yeah. So I don't want to belabor the point, but Micha asks, so why does the Deuteronomist gloss over all the details, leave out the fat entirely, and yet this whole huge big deal's being made about sacrificing in the temple, in the temple, in the temple, in the temple, in the temple? It seems like it's a huge deal, this sacrificing, because now it's only going to happen in the temple. Micha says that in Judges and Samuel and all the rest of the Torah, worship and sacrifice are allowed anywhere as long as it's in the land of Israel. Anywhere. So this is it's not just that Deuteronomy says it, it's that nowhere else is this the understanding. Only in Deuteronomy. What is Josiah doing? Josiah is canceling all other places of worship. And this would seem to be an act that glorifies and lifts up the Jerusalem temple, and would seem to suggest that the temple in Jerusalem is extremely important and is central, right, to Israelite worship. So he asks, Micha Goodman asks, how can Deuteronomy Deuteronomy be so indifferent to the details and naming of all the sacrifices while making the place of sacrifice seem so important? These two moves seem to contradict each other. But he says, but if we look at Deuteronomy and we ask, where is God in Deuteronomy? God is not on the mountain as God was in Exodus. We mentioned this last week. God is not coming down on the mountain as God did in Exodus. God remains in the sky in the Deuteronomist's account. So God stays where God is, and God is not on the mountain. Also, Exodus and Leviticus, as we mentioned last week, both place God. Where does God speak to Moshe from? Between the Kruvim on the ark in the Holy of Holies, right? This is where the voice of the divine emanates from. We also see fire sometimes coming out from before God, presumably from, right, the Holy of Holies, like the one that consumed Nadav and Abihu. So how does Deuteronomy, Micha asks, understand God's presence in the temple? When you bring your fruits to the temple, where you're supposed to recite a prayer, and in that prayer, which is in Deuteronomy 26, we ask God in that formula. Remember, we get very few prayers in the Bible. Very, very, very few. But chapter 26 of Deuteronomy preserves one. The prayer that you're supposed to say when you bring these fruits that we're talking about now in chapter 12, when you bring those, you're supposed to say a prayer. And in that prayer, you say, may God bless us from God's heights, from the heaven, right? Where God is. Bless our earth. Essentially, bless where we are. Bless us on the land. When Solomon dedicates the temple, he has this huge festival, right? He's going to dedicate the temple. And how do we know that everything is okay? How do we know that it worked, that everything was done the way it was supposed to? How do we know?
God accepted the sacrifice.
God accepted the sacrifice by consuming it, right? The fire comes. It's okay. God has accepted the sacrifice, and what does that mean? What's the actual thing that happens as God does that? God now moves into the temple, just like the Mishkan. What was the big proof that the Mishkan worked? God's presence, right, came to dwell in the Mishkan. For Solomon, the sacrifice was accepted, which means God has moved in to the house that that they have built for God. That's a sign of success. Okay. If you look at the words of Solomon, the speech that Solomon gives at that moment where God is supposed to move in, Solomon in that speech says, you think God sits anywhere on the earth? Hashemayim, v'shmei Hashemayim, the heavens and the skies of the heavens cannot contain the divine. So it's like, which is it? Is God in the house or not in the house? Does God live here or does God not live here? Again, it seems like there's a tension, a contradiction in the text. Solomon takes sacrifice, doesn't mention sacrifice in his speech. There's a centralization, right, of worship going on. And even in Solomon's speech, he says, God isn't here. We just built this house, and, Shemayim and Shmei Shemayim can't hold the divine. So again, it looks like there's this contradiction. Judith, are you wanting to say something here?
It seems to me like this is an effort to consolidate as well, by having only one place where people can meet and go through this ritual, and also one place where God will be able to accept the sacrifice, bring everybody together. It's more a condensation of tribalism, really.
Why?
Because they
can now eat meat wherever they want.
Yes, but they have to go to the place that God says they have to go in order to make the sacrifice.
Right. But what's the point of sacrifice now?
Well, I think it's a direct communication.
Okay. So what's the point of centralizing? Why consolidate? Why not leave it like it is?
Let every tribe just kind of wander off on its own. I think the message is...
No. Let them offer sacrifices wherever they are. In Ashdod. Why not? In Eilat. Why not? Why consolidate? What does that do?
Doesn't it bring the people together more instead of...
But if I want to bring a Shlomim sacrifice, I'm not coming together with anybody. I'm just schlepping to Jerusalem to make that sacrifice.
Thank you, Mehmet. I think it's a regulation. It consolidates the regulations.
Why consolidate? That's my question. What's the move of the Deuteronomist? It gives power to whom, Susan? Who does it give power to? A move like that.
Solomon. I mean, who you're talking about Solomon? So
I'm talking about the tension within the text dealing with God moving into the temple. That even there is indication that God doesn't, in fact, live in the temple. I'm setting it up for where Micha's going.
But it does give power to God. God will tell us where and how. And
I don't think so. Because God could be everywhere. God can be anywhere. If you're
that's what I believe now. But
if you're sacrificing on a hilltop somewhere and feeding your clan out of that sacrifice, you're having a meal with God. So certainly, to Dana's point, certainly the Jerusalem priesthood either gets more power or they're threatened. Because where are all the Levites going to go that are in all these little towns and villages? They now get a turn serving in the Jerusalem temple.
But doesn't it bring them all to Jerusalem?
They can't all be there at the same time. There's not room. There's not service for all of them. They're going to rotate. We get a rotational schedule of the priests from different places coming through the temple in Jerusalem. So actually,
so it's an order. Then it's an orderly way.
The power of the priesthood away. It disempowers the priesthood. All right, who, Sarah, you wanted to say something?
I think it distributes power to the entire people as they rotate through.
But they have power where they are.
But it makes Jerusalem holier.
Okay, so this is what Micha's addressing. This is why his lecture was so interesting to me. That's what it looks like is happening. You're making Jerusalem and the temple in Jerusalem the holy focus. It lifts it up, and now it's this really super special place. So it's really giving more glory and more power to the sacrificial system, to the priests, blah, blah, blah. Micah says, no, it's exactly the opposite. Now you are taking the sacred element out of eating meat. You are downplaying the importance of sacrifice. The fat is left off because it doesn't matter to the Deuteronomist. The details, yes. Whoever just said, Natasha, yes. Eating meat becomes desacralized. Eating meat becomes permissible. You don't need to go to Jerusalem to eat meat anymore, so why would you? You get to just eat your meat, right? You're going to bring your tithes and everything else to Jerusalem. It's a way of saying sacrifice is not that important. It's there. The Deuteronomist doesn't get rid of it, but the move is limiting the attachment to sacrifice. Because if the only way you can eat meat is when you offer a sacrifice, people were making sacrifices all the time, everywhere, all over Israel. Mammon is saying perhaps commoners demanded that, the people finally meet for everyone wherever they please. They could do that before. They could sacrifice before in the highlands, in the village, in Santa Monica. They could sacrifice and eat meat. So what's the move of centralizing? Micha says it is to desacralize eating meat. Now, it's not a meal between you and God anymore. That is a way to limit the people's dependence on the ritual as how they connect to God. If you lean out, notice the Deuteronomy doesn't talk about the Mishkan ever. Ever. If God is in the sky and is not in the temple and is not in the Mishkan, God is everywhere. We have taken sacrifice, eating a bologna sandwich with God. We've taken that out of people's everyday lives. It's gone. Now it's just a bologna sandwich. Why do that? I go back to the question, what does that accomplish? If you lower the focus on the ritual, on sacrifice, which was really their only real ritual, right? If you take off the focus on that, what does that accomplish? So one thing Richard is saying is it makes eating meat just a normal act, and right? So it's lessening the focus on the ritual aspect. Shelley, unmute.
Are they preparing the community for the fact that they're going to have to move and be without the temple and have a way to have their religion and their God without the temple?
Very nice, Shelley. There's already a move as early as Deuteronomy to not have the ritual be focused on the temple. That's exactly what it's doing. It's moving away from temple experience as the primary experience, even as it says, only where I cause my name to dwell, only in Jerusalem, only. It seems like it's lifting that up by making it so special, when in fact it's doing exactly what Shelley says. It's de-emphasizing the rituals that are attached to the temple. And David, to your point, it disempowers the priests. Because if you no longer need a priest to eat meat, if you can't sacrifice in your backyard anymore, you don't go see the priest very often. Maybe if you think you have leprosy, sarat, right? But you're seriously impure from corpse contamination and need to deal with that, right? But it de-emphasizes the importance of the priesthood, because now it's desacralizing, it's secularizing meat, taking away the people's experience of the ritual of sacrifice. Remember, Deuteronomy is about subsuming everything under the law. Everything under the law, meaning the priests as well. You start to de-emphasize the role of the priest as ritual officiant in your daily life and in your village. If you do that, if you de-emphasize ritual, de-emphasize sacrifice, de-emphasize the temple, what do you have left? What are you emphasizing? Yes, it's a statement by the Deuteronomist. What are you emphasizing? Community? You could eat meat before with your community as a sacrifice. What about community, Sarah? And then Mehmet?
You're emphasizing the ordinary people's ability to carry on the important work.
Okay, good. So taking it out of the hands of the priests, and we know the Deuteronomist wants to take it out of the hands of the king and give it to the law. So let's keep going down that rabbit hole. Mehmet, and then Michael?
I think I remember from last week that the Deuteronomy was written post-exilic. So by that time, they're not in the Holy Lands anymore.
So to show
they are.
They're going to have to live without the temple anyway.
So Well, this whole change enables Jews to be Jews anywhere they are without a temple.
Correct. So
or without Jerusalem.
Whether that's a result of the exile or not, right. That's the move the Deuteronomist is making, is that you can do the law wherever you are. That's the effect. Whether that's the intent or not, that's one of the effects, is that now Judaism becomes portable. Not all together, because you still have to bring your tithes and your first fruits and all of that. You still have to bring it to the temple. It's not getting rid of temple ritual or the priesthood. It is subsuming the importance of it under the law.
Well,
Michael?
by the time Deuteronomy was written, Judaism was already portable.
We don't know how much is post-exilic.
Okay.
We don't know that. It can be that much of Deuteronomy was written after the north fell and is centralizing worship in Judah, where Jerusalem is. So we don't know. But we know that wound up being the effect, for sure. Michael?
One of the consequences of this desacralization of sacrificial food is surely to desacralize animals themselves. I mean, once they are part of a very special ritual, then they have a very special status in our larger view of life and of meat. And if you desacralize meat eating, in some senses, you are abandoning the mystical sense of the animals themselves.
Okay, so maybe it's a protection against some kind of idolatrous instinct, raising animals to a different place, or a higher place, because it's part of this connecting with God. Centralization, here's the words of Micha Goodman, removes sacrifice from people's lives. So Yom Kippur is the day in time where, holiness remains and the temple ritual remains really focused. So this move of the Deuteronomist takes sacrifice, takes that ritual out of people's space, and Yom Kippur and the Deuteronomists take it out of people's sense of time. Yeah. We are secularizing both of those to a new extent. And what if you do that? We were getting there. We were almost there. Some people were getting there. If you de-emphasize all of that, what is being a good Israelite about? What is living into the covenant about?
How closely you follow the law.
What law? So if Deuteronomy is lessening the attachment to the ritual role of both the local shrine and in some ways secularizing their daily experience, what is left of the covenant to live into? Ve'ahavta et re'echa kamocha. You will love your neighbor as yourself.
It makes it your own responsibility.
You will take, no, it is the community's responsibility, but it's no longer about sacrifice.
Right.
Now it's about, how are you treating the widow and the orphan? How honest are your weights and measures? Have you put a stumbling block before the blind? Deuteronomy, by beating this horse of the centralization of worship in the temple, is reducing, says Micha Goodman, if you believe him, which I'm pretty tempted to buy his argument, you are de-emphasizing sacrifice and those rituals in people's lives. You're not totally taking it away. You can't freak them out that badly. And you need some kind of central shrine and some kind of coming together around that shrine and those rituals and those times of year. Great, fine. But by taking the sacred out of their daily lives, it de-emphasizes the focus on ritual and emphasizes instead that the way we keep the covenant is to live into the law. What is the law? If it's not the ritual law, take Leviticus. If it's not the ritual law, what's left? You shall love the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. Yes? Sacrificial spirituality is reconstructed as compassion and empathy. Beautifully said, Richard. Right? And as Bert said, it becomes about morality and justice. Tzedek, tzedek tirdof. Justice, justice will you pursue. This is the Deuteronomist. When Deuteronomy says, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, what follows that? So bring a sacrifice? No. Light some incense? No. What comes after Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad? Vishinantam levanecha v'dibarta bam b'shivtecha bebetecha uvlechtecha b'derech uvshoch becha uvkumecha. You shall speak of them. Speak of what? The words of Torah, the words of Deuteronomy. You will speak them when you lie down and when you rise up, when you're on the road, when you're running errands, when you're home, Vishinantam levanecha, and you shall teach them to your children. The words become the focus when you pull the focus off the ritual. Listen to the Ve'ahavta differently from now on. It is a radical move. We see the Ve'ahavta as normative. It was a radical, revolutionary move by the school of Deuteronomy. At the time the temple still stood, at the time where altars were all over the land of Israel and were kosher. That's when this shift is made, saying, It is the words. Take these words that I speak to you today to heart. Yeah? The words become the focus in the argument of Micha Goodman. Language expands as ritual contracts. This allowed, again, it may not have been the main point, but it allowed Judaism to move from being a ritual, place-based experience to being the words and the ideas and the ideals and the values, and those are portable. Those are portable. Had sacrifice evolved into prayer yet? No, it had not. But the move is here towards that, right? This is what the Deuteronomist is trying to do. Keep those words, bilvavecha, in your heart. That is how you live into the covenant and fulfill the covenant, is the words and the ideals and the values that Deuteronomy is coming to teach, that the law is coming to instruct about. And so, Bert, that move is the first step away from sacrifice and towards prayer being one of the new ways to relate. But they still have sacrifice for sure. But I think what Micha Goodman is arguing, and I think it's brilliant, is that this move, this shift is what sets it all up. The Deuteronomist is trying to downplay ritual. I'm not saying that's an accident. Micha's saying that's exactly the move here, because the Deuteronomist knows there's corruption. They're very concerned about corruption. So the Deuteronomist under Josiah is going to move everything under the law. The king's power, the judiciary, the priests, the prophets, everybody comes under the law now. Well, if you want the priests and everything to come under the law and be subsumed under the law, you need to de-emphasize people's attachment to those very rituals that only the Levites could perform. Right? If you can take baloney out of the package now, the Levite becomes much less powerful, much less necessary, much less an agent of your relationship, mitigating the relationship between you and the divine, because baloney has nothing to do with God anymore. It's just baloney. Yeah, sometimes I should think before I come up with metaphors. So here, this is Micha's argument, that the critique of sacrifice that we get like in the Psalms, think about Isaiah that we read on Yom Kippur. You all know it by heart. You don't know you know it, but you know it by heart. Is this the sacrifice I want? Right? Do I need your turkey sandwich? No. What do I want? For you to unfetter the chains of poverty, for you to reach out to those who don't have. Remember Isaiah? We read it with great passion on Yom Kippur and great pride. Because you know what? We're proud of this move that the Deuteronomist makes, aren't we? Do I really care about your sacrifices, says the God of Isaiah? No. Fet on your sacrifices. I care about, are you enacting justice, compassion? Do you see the orphan and the widow? Do you take it seriously that their well-being is your responsibility? Are you building an Israelite society reflective of Torah values or not? That is what I care about, says the God of Isaiah. And we still read that thousands of years later because we love that move. But they work for the ACLU, says Richard Proche. Right? So we love that move. We are still people attached to that move. We are still people in progressive Judaism who say ritual is great, ritual is important. If ritual becomes the point, it is useless. Micha says this is the move of the Deuteronomist. Ritual is nice. Ritual has its place. If ritual becomes the only thing, ritual is useless. Less than useless. It pulls your focus off of your religious obligations that are the things that will prevent you being kicked off the land that we talked about at such length last week. Ritual only has value, says Micha, insofar as you acknowledge that it has limited value. If it gets all the value, it's worthless. And so its value is only established after criticism and cutting it back, right, occur. Ritual can ossify into structures of oppression for sure. And Richard, I would go further and say the Deuteronomist is suggesting it already had. Right? I think you're right. I think your instinct is exactly right. That according to Micha's argument, anyway, that the Deuteronomist, that school, understood that it had already ossified into something that was not helpful. And so it was a move away from that and a way to de-emphasize it. Linda?
How does kashrut figure into all of this?
In what way?
Well, were they eliminating it? Were they moving it along?
Kashrut was only about which animals you're allowed to eat.
I know, but
they can't eat anything that's treif.
Okay.
They can't.
All right. I was just thinking if they could eat whatever they wanted to wherever they were.
No. It says you can now kill from your flocks.
Okay.
Wherever you are, but you can't eat what's not allowed.
All right.
But remember, it's very limited. Kashrut's very limited at that point. It's only about species. It's not about anything else. And you can't eat something treif, torn. So they would have had to slaughter it and eat it. It could not, you can't eat road pizza.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So what do the ultra-Orthodox think about this interpretation? Susan asks, which interpretation? The one that says by limiting sacrifice to the temple, you are de-emphasizing ritual?
No, I'm thinking about the fact that they rely so much on ritual in their practice. And so I'm wondering if they're reading this the same way Micah is, they would disagree perhaps.
Okay, so first of all, perhaps you think. So first of all, yeah, they might disagree with a lot that we say in this room. But the second point is, for them, this is not the move of a Deuteronomist. This is not the move of an author. This is God.
Okay. Yeah.
What are they going to argue? What are we going to argue about? The argument starts at God wrote this. No, the Deuteronomist did. The argument is that fundamental. There's no point in the conversation because they don't see a motive, right? They see God telling us what to do, and we go, okay, we'll do that. But then they kind of have to contend with the fact that this is different from Exodus and Leviticus, right? And Samuel and Judges, where they were sacrificing everywhere. But that's not my job to have to figure out how they deal with that. There was another question, Meg. What about the lack of ritual in society? May not ritual become a way to connect outside of oneself to remember the other? Of course, that's what it's for. The problem is when the ritual becomes the focus and not the means by which you leave the self and connect to the other. And clearly, the Josianic reform understands whether that's right or wrong, whether they're correct or incorrect. They, that school, and under Josiah, they saw that there was too much focus on the ritual aspect and not enough concern for how do I leave the focus on me and have greater greater empathy and greater awareness of the people who aren't necessarily like me, who I'm supposed to see as being like me. Right, Al, did you want to say something? If so, you're going to have to unmute again. There you go.
I just did. Okay.
Okay.
The fact that they de-emphasize the temple now at a later year when the temple was destroyed, that becomes such a focus of the prophets, and it should be de-emphasized. For some reason, people should have an emphasis on the morality and all the laws of God, rather than treating the loss of the temple as such a calamitous event.
Right. And what's so funny to me always is the folks who pray for the third temple and who want the sacrifice back and want the rituals of the temple back, and they focus on every detail so lovingly, would be out of a job if that happened. They don't want that, right?
Well, they want to get rid of the priests.
Right. They don't want the priests to come back and be the boss of Judaism. They don't want that.
I think that led to the culmination where rabbis became the focus of the worship.
Indeed. The teacher of the law becomes who is the functionary in connecting the people to God and to God's will.
Yeah.
Right? It becomes the Rav. Yeah. You're right. It becomes the teacher of the words, the teacher of the ideas, not the officiant at the ritual.
Right.
That's exactly the move that Micha Goodman would argue begins here with the Josianic reform of the Deuteronomist school. All right, Bert, you said you wanted to say something?
I think that the word ritual, unfortunately, has become synonymous with empty. And I see what you're talking about, and ritual can be empty, and ritual can also be filled with meaning and connected to morality. I don't think, I'm forgetting about sacrifice, that they are necessarily opposites.
They're not.
Right, exactly. And
that's why the Deuteronomist doesn't get rid of sacrifice.
Right, but ritual, just because something is a ritual doesn't mean it's potentially worthless.
Correct.
That's not what's being, the question is, if you do ritual without also loving your neighbor, that's not a problem.
If it's all about your Kiddush cup and your Havdalah set and that's it, then it's worthless.
But that's not saying don't have a Havdalah set.
No, of course not.
I want to be clear about that.
That's why Micha says they did not do away with sacrifice. There should be ritual. You still should schlep your tithes to the temple. There still needs to be a priesthood. There still needs to be all of this. When it becomes the only thing, then it has no value. It has to have limited value. And the point of ritual should be to point you towards those other things. When it becomes the focus itself, just like we read on Yom Kippur with Isaiah, is this the fast I want? Fet on your fast. Are you taking care of the immigrant children at your border? Are you taking care of those people who are being left behind because of COVID-19? That's what I care about. Fully on your fast. Are we supposed to stop fasting? No. Right? So you kind of, Judith Karen, Bubby saying, I agree with Bert that ritual is my reminder of the words. Right. That's how it's supposed to work. Right. And Robert Gorin says the other problem with sacrifice is that it easily becomes transactional. Exactly right. Exactly right. This is not a critique of the system. This is a critique of people, Jews, people whose tendency is to over-rely on the form. Right? Because it's easier. When the ritual is a reminder of the words, like Bubby said, yes, that's right. That's the point. When we make Kiddush, it's Zecher Le'etziat Mitzrayim. It's a remember of the going out from Egypt. The ritual is supposed to point you towards the teaching, the point, right? You get to make Kiddush over this amazing cup of wine, and you're free and get to drink this wine and own this wine because I took you out of Egypt, and that gives you obligations, right? That's exactly right. So I find this is exact for us, like I think Bert kind of indicated, for us as progressive Jews, I feel like it kind of works the other way. We have a hard time connecting a lot of our people to ritual because there's no meaning for them in the ritual as being a way to connect to the divine, to a sense of the sacred, to whatever it is that ritual is supposed to do for us. So a lot of our people really struggle. So ours is not so much what the Deuteronomist is worried about. Although, don't get me started. Trust me, I could go there. But I think we're not immune to what the Deuteronomist is worried about. Right? Like we over rely on the things that we can say are proof of us being good people or whatever, but like, are we really stretching? Are we really seeing the other? Are we really seeing the poor? Are we really giving to where it hurts? Mehmet, you want to say something?
Well, I think even today, rituals become way too commercialized in certain times. Like, I mean, for example, how much do you spend for your bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah, and what kind of a party do you throw in, and nice. All that. Rituals, there's always a tendency, wherever there are people, there's always a tendency to commercialize things and go away from its original meaning. I wanted to come back, and I think rituals continued in private homes. Just like lighting Shabbat candles,
Which is rabbinic.
Yeah, I wanted to ask that. Is it in the Torah? It's not in the Torah, right?
All of that is rabbinic. Once you don't have a temple, now you need you make your own temple. The altar, your home becomes the temple. Your home becomes a mikdash me'at, a small sanctuary for the divine. Exactly the move the rabbis make. They're not stupid. The pagans need a tree inside during the winter time. No problem. It is now a Christmas tree. No problem. The rabbis were brilliant, right? They took elements that would have before been, different and moved them into the home. And have the chutzpah to say, Asher kiddishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu, who made us holy, who sanctifies us and commands us to light Shabbos candles. Really? Where? Show me. Asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu is chutzpah. It is holy chutzpah. The rabbis say who made us holy with your commandments and commanded us to fill in the blank with the stuff they just made up. That's chutzpah. Right. So, but it had weight. If God commands it, I'm fulfilling God's commandment. This becomes a kosher ritual. But they made it up, right? Yes, and we still love it. Absolutely, we do. So this was a brilliant move and like I was saying, maybe it's not as much for us, but all you have to do, if I get my Christian colleagues started on Easter, she can go on for an hour and a half without taking a breath. What's happened to Easter? This is what the Deuteronomist is worried about. You eat chocolate bunnies and hide Easter eggs in the backyard, and you think you're living into what the risen Christ demands of you? Right? So the Easter bunny is exactly what the Deuteronomist is concerned about. I mean, I'm not trying to be disrespectful. That's exactly what Deuteronomy is worried about. Is the Easter bunny becoming Easter? Santa becomes the birth of the sun. Really? For practicing, believing Christians who think these rituals are supposed to point them towards what does it mean that Jesus came here for us? That God became incarnate and suffered and died for us lowly human beings? That's about a fat guy in a suit coming down your chimney with presents? Right? That's a horrifying reduction of the rituals and trappings becoming the point and moving folks off of what those rituals were actually supposed to be pointing people towards. All right, David, and then we will close.
Amy, is there a danger that the ultra-Orthodox, with their focus on extreme observance of behavior on a daily basis, is that a pseudo-ritual that they would now look at based on what we've talked about and say maybe we're focusing too much on things as opposed to substance?
Well, the Deuteronomist would say yes. That's the critique of the Deuteronomist. You're so worried about the hechsher on your salami, like that's what's really important? Are you making sure other people have salami? Are you making sure kids that aren't getting fed at school have access to other meals? Right? So the obsession with the minutia and the ritual and the detail, yes, that can become an impediment, says the School of Deuteronomy, to fulfilling the actual laws that are actually the ones that are going to make you a society worthy of God's blessing. Yes. So, and for all of us, there's that critique holds for all of us, that too often the form becomes what's important instead of the function. And when we rely too much on those things, then where's the heart of what Torah is supposed to be doing in terms of helping us build a society, right, that is one of justice and one of equity and one of compassion? And I think it's an important teaching and an important reminder for us right now. And it may not just be about sacrifice or ritual, but it may be like the stuff we focus on is often dafka, the stuff that pulls us off of focusing on the ways that we could really be addressing the wants and the struggle of many, many, many people in our society. I mean, that we look at that number, 166,000 some odd people, and we're still arguing about masks. I'm sorry. What do you think the Deuteronomist would have to say about that?
You've been listening to Rabbi Amy Bernstein's Friday Morning Torah Study from Kehillat Israel in Pacific Palisades, California. For more information, go to our website, www.ourki.org.